Welcome to the Madness and Grace podcast, where we explore the connection between mental health and faith. I'm Dr. Matthew Stanford, neuroscientist, author, and mental health advocate.
And I'm Dr. Madeline Stiers, therapist and trauma researcher. We're so glad you're joining us today. Each week, we have authentic conversations about personal stories, we share professional insights, and explore the meaningful ways faith can influence mental well-being.
Whether you're seeking comfort, understanding, or simply a new perspective, we're here to journey with you. Thanks for tuning in. Now let's dive into today's conversation. All right, hello and welcome everyone to this episode of Madness and Grace. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that really is the topic that kind of got me into the whole mental health arena. I was a long-time researcher, and today we're going to talk about is mental illness a spiritual battle, kind of looking at mental health problems from a spiritual perspective. And I think that's perfectly appropriate to do that. I think that mental health issues, mental health in general has spiritual aspects to it, as does just about everything else. I think the problem is going to come in when we have people look at mental health problems as if they are uniquely spiritual. They are just spiritual and there's nothing else. And so I always like to start off in this discussion with kind of thinking about how God has created us and kind of thinking about the scriptural texts that kind of tell us about that. So at the Hope and Healing Center here, we think of how God has created us as more of a holistically, in a kind of a multifaceted way. So there are different aspects to our being. They're all interconnected. We're all unity of those interconnected, but we are a spirit, we have a mental life, we have a physical life, and we have a relational life. So within each one of those, we have needs. We have physical needs, mental needs, spiritual needs, relational needs. And I think we look at a verse like Luke 2:52 that talks about Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. I think that's a great example of kind of those four aspects of our being. So when we look at a mental health problem, I don't think it's appropriate for us to just look at it from a spiritual perspective, because I know from all the years that I have working with individuals with mental health problems, and I'm sure Maddie will give us examples as well, she sees that it affects people at all of those levels. It may affect people at some levels more than others and in kind of different varieties, but they're affected at all levels and they need kind of a holistic intervention. So is it a spiritual battle? Absolutely, it's a spiritual battle, but it's not as simple as saying, well, you just need to pray more and that will go away.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I think about when we talk about is mental illness a spiritual battle is the women that I worked with who have experienced some sort of physical or sexual trauma, struggling with PTSD or complex PTSD, it's intertwined. The big question of, why did God let this happen to me? Why did God send this to me? Or did I sin and do I deserve this? So it becomes a spiritual battle for a lot of these women. And in other illnesses, it might look slightly different. But when we're talking about trauma, from a trauma perspective, they're articulating these questions in this battle that they're struggling with. And for some people, they find great comfort and support in their spirituality and their relationship with God and in their faith community and those relationships here on earth that they've developed. And for a lot of people, it really brings it into question, like, who is God to me and how could this happen in my life? And, really starts to question what is the meaning of all of this. And then in that sense, it very much so becomes a spiritual battle. And, it's why it's important to have, we work really hard to get our clients connected to faith communities that are understanding of mental illness. So they're not getting some rhetoric that is, damaging or harmful for people who are struggling in the midst of a spiritual battle with their mental health as well.
Yeah, but you want a balanced view of this. You can easily over spiritualize it. You could say, okay, if you have depression, that's a sin. You need to stop doing that. You need to just not be depressed anymore, that it's some kind of a choice that you're making. And you can under-spiritualize it. You could say spirituality, your religion, your faith has nothing to do with this. This is just solely a neurochemical imbalance. And if I just give you the right medication, everything's going to be better. Well, I know whether I'm a person of faith or not, I know that just giving somebody medication for whatever mental health problem they might have is never enough to completely get rid of what's going on. There's a lot of other things that are required as well. And I think kind of spirituality is an important part of that. So I think we need to be more balanced. I think the scriptures are clear that we're made as a multi-part being, so why would we not be affected at all of our levels? I think another aspect of this in the context of kind of religion and that's kind of spiritual battle type of thing is some people may look at it as from more of a spiritual warfare perspective, that this is the demonic, particularly when someone has, say, a psychotic disorder, something like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, where they might hear voices or perceive things that aren't really there, hallucinations. And so I think that can be turned into kind of, well, this is the demonic. We need to do some kind of deliverance with this person, kind of tantamount to an exorcism or something like that. Again, I think that, I've seen a lot of mentally ill people in my life, and I know you have as well. And I've rarely ever seen anyone that what I'm seeing could not be explained from a mental health perspective, and that they were not successfully treated from a mental health perspective. So I think that kind of disentangles that idea. Certainly not in any way to say that the demonic don't exist. Certainly not to say that Christians, people of faith, aren't under some type of attack from within a spiritual battle. But I don't think you can just separate out one form of illness and say that's a spiritual demonic type and others aren't. I think we look at the scriptures, which, if we're being truthful, there's discussion within the scriptures of demonic activity, but it's there's not a lot. There's not a whole lot. But within the scriptures, I mean, the demonic is said to be able to make us physically ill, to do other things. And so I don't, in fact, I've rarely, if ever, heard someone say to someone who just said they got a cancer diagnosis, well, that's the demonic.
And
Yeah,
and that's why it's so important. I mean, the work that we're doing and talking about mental health in the church, because we know that most people go to their faith community when they're not feeling well, when they're struggling with their mental health. And faith leaders are trained to do what? Offer spiritual support and help people who might be struggling spiritually with, some battles and whatnot. And whether that's through kind of a demonic lens or whatever that may be, they're not educated necessarily on mental illness. So you go to a professional in one area who's not as well versed, and we might get a hyper focus on just the spiritual component of it, when that's important, but we also need to be addressing the mental health aspect of it. And then you think about it from the context of our field, the mental health field, and you go to a mental health care provider and you're struggling with your mental illness, but that's impacting your spiritual wellness as well. And your provider doesn't want to talk about it or is uncomfortable with it. And
right.
I mean, it's the overlap of these two is wild, and you're really looking for support in both of these areas.
Well, I would say a very similar example there is, if you go to a psychiatrists treat psychiatric problems with medication. That's how they treat them. Psychiatrists today don't do therapy anymore. You rarely find a psychiatrist that does talking therapy.
Right.
But you also rarely find a psychiatrist that refers his clients or her clients to therapists. When we all know that the literature shows us that therapy and medication together work better than just medication by itself. And so is the psychiatrist wrong when he says, well, this is a neurochemical issue and I need to prescribe medication? Well, no, he or she isn't wrong in that, but they've been trained in a specific kind of intervention. They're working from the physical perspective of those four aspects: the physical, mental, spiritual, and relational. Just like when you go to a clergy member or a minister and they focus solely on the spiritual, I think all of us need to be more holistic, and we need to say, okay, well, this is where my expertise is, and this is where I can help you, but I know there's a broader set of things that may be necessary here. So I want to connect with a mental health care provider. I want to be connected to whatever other resources might be necessary. I also would say that, I think it's important to realize that while, faith and religion, spirituality can be tremendously positive aspect of our recovery and help us build hope and give us a foundation for healing, it also can be tremendously negative and really damaging. And I think that's where we really have to be careful the way we engage people on this. So for instance, there's this idea of positive religious coping and negative religious coping. So using religion in a positive way, using your faith in a positive way to help you. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is like you recognize that God is present with you in your suffering, that God is there to comfort you, empower you, God is for you, those types of things. God is good. You have a faith community that wants to support you, and people are praying for you. And when you pray, God hears you. And those are all very positive things. On the negative side, you might be, someone might say, oh, well, you just don't pray enough. This is demonic. Your faith is too weak.
You've sinned. This has
Right,
been
you've
sent to
sinned,
you because
and
of that.
looking at it from that perspective, and really what we find from research is individuals who take that or have that more positive religious approach, where they see religion as a benefit to their recovery, they have much better outcomes for the mental health treatment. Whereas those who have this other approach, it's a sin, it's demonic, it's, someone has told them these things, they have much worse mental health outcomes. So faith can be, both a positive or a negative, depending on the focus of that. I don't think that takes away the idea that this is a spiritual battle. I think you just kind of put it in that context. There very much oftentimes is a battle trying to determine, well, is God present with me in this? Is God punishing me? And I think we have to go back and we really just have to ask ourselves, let's say I got diagnosed with diabetes. Would I be asking these same questions, or would I be crying out to God for healing, comfort, support, be present with me, strengthen me, provide for me, physicians, medications, those types of things. And I think that's more the way we ought to think about it. We don't need to put this in some kind of special category.
It's illness. I mean, mental illness is just an illness in a different category. And I think people tend to forget that and want to kind of think about it as this like intangible thing. And in reality, it really is just another form of illness. And we need to think about it in that sense in order to best support people and their spiritual wellness as well.
Right. We've titled this, is mental illness a spiritual battle? So I think if you're out there and you have a loved one and perhaps you're struggling with this, or maybe you're even struggling with this, I think it's better to kind of ask it in a different way. So instead of saying, is mental illness a spiritual battle, say, how can faith be a foundation for healing and recovery? Because the reality is no one would deny that faith can be an important aspect of healing and recovery. Even if you believe that mental health problems are primarily spiritual, you would believe that, you would say that. And so how can our faith be a foundation for healing and recovery? And I think that's where we might differ after that. But I think that's the more positive way to think about it. And, and I'm not thinking about some kind of, magical incantation where if I read a proverb every day for 30 days, then everything's going to be great or whatever. But what is the role of faith in my recovery? Could that just be me learning more about the character of God, or what my value is in God, or how God has created me, or different things like that. Understanding how to forgive others. I mean, there's all kinds of things. I mean, here at the Hope and Healing Center, we use a very integrated approach to care where people are looked at as those four aspects: physical, mental, spiritual, and relational. And we look at all of those aspects as a person goes through care.
And I think people people are afraid of this conversation, maybe even especially therapists or licensed providers, because, if you're a person of faith and you have someone come into your office that's a client and they're questioning their faith or using some of those more negative coping skills, maybe blaming themselves or blaming God, or they've become angry with God. And, having that conversation with someone about why they're frustrated or this spiritual battle that they're kind of going through can be challenging, because we typically want to say, well, no, be thankful and gracious and know that God is there supporting you and uplifting you. When in reality, sometimes people just need to be heard and understood that they're having these thoughts, and there's no moral failing because they are upset and questioning what's going on in their lives. It's a part of processing through it, right? Like, when you're diagnosed with cancer, you start to question what's why me? Why did this happen? Ultimately, we see a lot of people landing on finding some spiritual support as they go through this and through their faith community and their friends and family and whatnot. But mental illness, there is, but oftentimes people don't realize there's kind of a set treatment plan that you can set up like we do with cancer treatment. And so people will get lost in this kind of idea of like mental illness is this thing that you just need to pick yourself up by the bootstraps and keep moving forward, and God will be there, and you need to rely on your faith and his grace, and then everything will be good. When in reality, people start to have questions. And as a therapist sitting there with someone in a room who's unwell, sad, they may be depressed, and they're questioning, are they bad? Are they innately bad? And does God hate them? Or did God send this to me because I'm sinful and I have these extreme moral failings? We're all sinful. We're all fallen people. And the reality is that that's not the truth. But walking through that kind of thought process and those trains of thoughts can be really challenging as a provider, because where do you, how do you walk someone through that is it does take some training. And I think people are afraid to have those conversations. They want to just kind of put that little Band-Aid over it and say, just be happy and grateful, and God is good, and yay, pray, and everything will be fine. And some of that, yes.
I agree. I think, I really think that what we're seeing in when we have this kind of what I would consider over spiritualizing of mental health problems is I just see it as a kind of a spiritual reflection of the normal stigma and shame that goes with, that you see in the general population. It's just a spiritualized version of that.
Right.
So people of faith are more apt to talk about things of faith. And so, they're going to talk about these things from that perspective. And I think that is the problem here, is that they're trying to put it into that context kind of naively, unfortunately.
Pray harder, have more faith.
Right.
With the secular sport, you're lazy, you just need to do more.
But there's not that kind of stigma associated with cancer or diabetes or whatever physical illness you could think of. And there's more of a general understanding in the community of who you go to, what you do. There's these treatments. And you and I can sit here and tell people, well, there are standard treatments for depression that are effective. But because, mental health related treatments are a relatively kind of new science in relationship to other aspects of medicine, it does have those moments where it kind of looks like, people are kind of doing it by trial and error. The other thing is, really it's the only condition in which just sitting down and talking with someone in a structured way can be beneficial to them from that perspective. But one of the things you have to understand for those of you out here that don't really know about therapy and stuff is therapy is not you just sitting with someone and just talking to them for an hour. There is a structured approach. You're looking at specific symptoms, way to minimize those symptoms. It is a treatment, and it does alter their brain function. And that's been demonstrated with fMRI. So I think that you have to understand that the treatments are very effective, and it's the stigma and the shame associated with mental health problems. I mean, there will come a day where there is no stigma and shame. And, but again, that in no way takes away the fact that, if you were to ask me, is mental illness a spiritual battle? I would say, absolutely, it has spiritual aspects to it. But so do other things. I think cancer is a spiritual battle. I think heart disease is a spiritual battle. You can name any disorder because we are a multifaceted being. God has made us that way, and we're affected at all levels. And so the spiritual is just one of those. A lot of times when men have a heart attack, they begin to question their own mortality and wonder, am I going to make it? Am I going to die? And then some guys go into a deep depression. They aren't able to work anymore. They're so afraid to leave the house. I mean, there's a lot of things that go on. And so, you're going to question, why is this happening to me? Where is God in this? So that does happen from physical illnesses, and it also happens with mental health problems too. So I think in faith communities, we just have to do a better job of kind of destigmatizing it. But I also think we have to recognize we have a significant role to play And that's not just from a spiritual perspective, it's from a more holistic perspective.
Yeah, and remembering that mental illness, while it does impact spiritual life, it's not proof of weak faith. And God cares for the whole person, our body, our mind, and our spirit. And nothing can separate us from the love of God, even though in moments we might be feeling that way. And to encourage people
Absolutely.
to lean back on their faith as they're in points of distress.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just it's really an education type of thing. I think a lot of times the other thing that makes mental health seem so different is that we all have emotions. We all have thoughts. We all get sad. We all have stress and anxiety. And we look at those experiences that are within a normal range, and we think they are the same as when someone, say, has an anxiety disorder. And so we want to understand why you would be so depressed. You don't have any reason to be depressed. Everything's great for you. Again, not
That's why I'm depressed.
right. And so I think that that's another thing we kind of misunderstand. But when someone says they have cancer, unless we have experienced cancer ourselves, we never kind of put ourselves in their shoes. We don't think about it that way, and we feel compassion. I used to do this little kind of, in the presentations and the trainings that we offered, I used to have this little kind of thought experiment. I bring two people up from the audience, and I put one on one side of the stage and one on the other, and everyone in the audience would know these people, and so I would say, I would whisper in one person's ear that I want you to tell them, what your name is, and that yesterday you were just diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And then the other person, I would have that person do that. And then I would ask the audience, okay, well, for those of you who know this person, what was your initial feeling when they said that? What were the feeling? Oh, compassion. I'm sad. I'm just thinking about how that's going to affect her children. It's very compassionate, very caring. And then the other person, I say, well, I want you to say your name, and I want you to tell the group, yesterday I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And then I asked the crowd the same thing. And what's interesting is they're very quiet, because they really realize what the difference is right away. A lot of, if they're honest, you always get someone who say, I just want to fix her.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to pray with her, but not, it's not I want to pray for healing for her. It's like, I want to pray for her from almost a spiritual warfare perspective. They recognize that they don't feel compassion. They feel more fear, and more like, I need to fix this person. Whereas on the other side, it's all compassion. And really, we should feel the same way. I mean, there should be no difference in how we feel, because someone we know is suffering.
It's interesting. It's as if they're taking on a little bit more of the burden, like, in some sense, with the cancer, we know who's going to be caring for that in the physical sense. But with the bipolar disorder, they don't know. People don't know what to do. They don't know who to send them to. So there's this sense of, I need to fix this person. I need to pray with them. It's a spiritual weakness in a sense, as opposed to, this is a diagnosable illness, and let's get them, like, I'm compassionate. Let's get them connected to the people that can help support.
And there aren't, I mean, certainly within Christendom, there might be small sects of people, but there are not major pastors out there, preachers and authors saying that cancer is always a demon, and
Sure. Right.
and I know for a fact, I have some of their books because I've written against them, saying that every time someone has schizophrenia, that's a demon, or every time someone's depressed, that's a sin. I mean, that's tough to go against. That's tough for people to not, it leaks throughout all of Christendom. You may not specifically believe that, but when you are a person of faith and you see things from a spiritual perspective, which is perfectly appropriate, I do myself, you put everything through a spiritual lens, perhaps, and then now you have depression in front of you, and you've got and what I would say is, absolutely there's a spiritual component, but don't abandon the others. There's a physical component, there's a mental component, there's a relational component. And so it's perfectly appropriate for someone with depression that would benefit from medication to take medication. It's also perfectly appropriate for someone that would benefit from that has depression to be in a faith-based support group. I mean, there's nothing. I mean, those are wonderful things. It's not one or the other. And so I think when we say, is it a spiritual battle? A lot of times it's put into that it's this or that. And the reality is that, if you're a person of faith, there is a spiritual battle going on, whether you know about it or not. That's just what the scriptures tell us. And so, certainly we are fallen, and we live in a fallen world, so we suffer and we get ill and things like that. But that's not to say that this person just didn't read enough of the Bible, and that's why they have X, So I think we just have to be very careful. I think we just have to be more compassionate. Just think back to, that little example that I used to do in those presentations. It's quite eye-opening. It really is eye-opening just to have a conversation with people afterwards, because a lot of times
they've realized,
they can't tell you why they felt the way they did, and that bothers them. Like, why did I not
feel compassion immediately the same sense?
Well, that doesn't, it doesn't make any sense to me, because I did when she said she had cancer. I don't understand. And I think it's teaching, it's learning, it's experience. Most people don't just share with you that they have a mental health problem because of the stigma. So I think we just have to be compassionate, because God is compassionate. God is present. We're not disqualified because we have a mental health problem from service to the Lord or being involved in the fellowship or whatever that might be.
Yeah, and I think that's a common question or topic that many different faith communities are going to experience is this just a spiritual battle? What does this combination look like? All of these things that we've discussed. And, I think it's okay to have these conversations and to maybe struggle with them and understand why you may feel compassion towards one person more or less than another, and really kind of bringing awareness to that. And so if you found yourself in that position, or if your faith community is in that position, know that you're not alone. It's not an uncommon kind of dilemma or topic to see pop up, where people have differing opinions. And And
you don't have to have some perfect right answer, like you're some, theologian who's going to write this down. Everybody's going to be all right now. So you just have to worry about whoever it is that is in your life that has a mental health problem, or may that be you. You just have to look at it from that person's perspective and just focus on supporting them. You don't have to come up with some perfect reasoning for all of this. I mean, I could throw out 10 different types of disorder. I could throw out things like suicide. I mean, we would have these in-depth, long spiritual, and at the end of it, it's really about people that are suffering, people that need support, people that need you to be present with them and help them recognize that they're loved by God.
And I think if you're looking for more in-depth information on some of this outside of this podcast, Matt's got a few books out that have been published that are great resources. I guess we could probably put those in the show notes. But
we'll drop those in the show notes, and you could take a look at that. Just one person's thoughts, but there's a lot of books out there. No, I mean, it really is. I mean, it's a journey. It's a journey. I think that I know at the end of the day, I don't know a lot, but at the end of the day, I would say this: if God has put somebody in your life who's suffering, who's in distress, He is never going to tell you that you showed them too much compassion or too much grace. I mean, it's just never going to happen. So, just help them move forward in their recovery. Tell them how much God loves them. I mean, that goes a long way. That goes.
I always think, who was Jesus sitting with in the Bible? Who was he?
Right.
Communing with, and it was always the ill, the sick, the outcast,
broken people. I mean, that's the thing. So, most of the time when Jesus is really angry at people and usually kind of sharp-tongued, it's with religious leaders. So it's not with suffering person that has some illness. I mean, so, I think that, and at the end, again, I can just belabor the point here, but it's tremendously self-righteous to look at somebody with a mental health problem and then try to just contextualize that as spiritual, and then have that come out of your mouth. If you would just read the Psalms.
Pray better.
Like, I literally had a pastor say that to somebody that had depression. If you would just read the Psalms, that'll take away your depression. I mean, that really what you're saying is you're just not good enough Christian. You just haven't read the Bible enough. If you would pray more, if you had a deeper faith,
so many of my clients have heard that it's so sad as a Christian to hear that, because I think, there's either a self-righteousness in that or an ignorance, really a lack of awareness, but it can be so damaging to people who are struggling. And when they're looking towards their faith for support and comfort, and in a time of extreme distress oftentimes, and they're just kind of hit with the hammer of shame, it's so sad and so hard, and it really pushes people away from God. And
absolutely,
that's one of the
that's what
saddest things I
shows.
hear. Yeah,
absolutely. So
don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. I mean, even if you think that, I mean, what I can tell you is this. I'll end us on this. Okay, I have published research that shows that when people are told those things that I just said, these horrible things, that it actually moves them away from God, and it causes them to leave the faith. So I've never met anyone that said those things because they wanted someone to leave the faith. They always say those things very naively,
right,
because they believe that it's going to make them a stronger Christian or whatever, get them closer to God. But I can tell you that it absolutely does just the opposite. So what you're doing when you say those kind of things to somebody in their darkest moments of distress is you're actually driving them away from God. And, I have to wonder, what is God going to think about that? I mean, is he going to go, oh, that's great, I'm glad you drove that person away from me? Or, hey, you know what? I know you didn't know what to do. And in fact, you even questioned whether maybe this was wrong, what they had, but you showed them a lot of compassion and grace, and well done.
Yeah.
Well done. So we'll just leave it at that, because I get kind of angry when I talk about these things a lot of times, because sadly, Maddie and I see a lot of people have been really, really hurt. And we could have a whole episode where I would tell you examples of people that I've worked with, and you would not believe how bad they are, of ridiculous things that were done to them by churches.
It's like, you hear about, we said we're ending this, then we keep going. You hear about people who are hurt by the church. There's abuse in the church.
Right.
And we know that happens and that exists. And so often what we hear here is not just that, but it's people who were hurt, their mental health is struggling, they had issues elsewhere, and they come to the church, and then they're just, like I said, beat with the hammer of shame. And it's just whack. Yeah. And you're just like, oh, why?
And what an opportunity that was, God had set up for them to get some support from a healing, supportive community, and they just get smacked in the head.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not talking about, and Maddie's not talking about something subtle. We're not talking like, oh, well, they didn't have a support.
You misspoke. No.
I'm talking about, like, just told flat out, there's no such thing as mental illness. What you have is sin.
Right.
Or you're just not a good enough Christian. Or what, I mean, overtly, kind of vicious kinds of things.
If you said that to someone before, know that's there. You can still work to say different things the next time someone approaches you with that. Don't beat yourself up too much. We're all, like you said, we're all part of.
So is
working towards change and understanding.
Is mental illness a spiritual battle? I mean, I think we started out by, yes, and we all have this going on, and we all are a multi-part being. But I think another aspect of the spiritual battle is that we are all trying to figure it out from a spiritual perspective, and we need to not fall into our kind of human ways of being self-righteous and fixers and hurting people, when we really should just be supporting them. So thanks for being with us today, and we look forward to having you in our conversations in the future. Please do check the episode notes. I'll have some links to some of the books that I've written that look at mental health issues from a clinical and a biblical perspective. Have a great day.
Thanks for joining our conversation on this episode of the Madness and Grace podcast. If you found value in our discussion today, we'd love it if you'd subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode.
And if you enjoyed what you heard, please consider leaving us a rating and review. It helps others find these important conversations.
Sharing this podcast with friends and family members is also a wonderful way to extend hope to those who might be struggling with mental health concerns.
We'll be back next time with another candid conversation about madness and grace. See you then.